Michael, for those that don't know you, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself and your life?
I've had two careers. I trained initially as a vet in Bristol, where I met my wife, Nikki. We married, had 4 children, and then later on I retrained as a pilot to work with Mission Aviation Fellowship. And I flew with Mission Aviation Fellowship in Papua New Guinea for 25 years.
So how has that changed the way you think about money?
I became a follower of Jesus while I was at university, and so I've seen or handled money from two sides, both in a standard well-paying job and then latterly or secondly in my career as a pilot, which is working for a charity where we're receiving money that come from gifts that people have made.
In practical terms, how does that affect the way you've invested in the life of the church and God's kingdom?
As a follower of Jesus, not just me, but Nikki and I have always felt that money is under Jesus' authority. It's not just our own. And so when I was working as a vet, with a young family and a mortgage, we still tried to give the minimum of 10% of our salary away, which was at times a struggle. But then from the time that I joined MAF, we had to raise money, had to raise support, out of which I was paid a salary. The other went to pay medical expenses, travel expenses and the like. But so we had to go round to different churches and speak to individuals about what we were doing. And early in the piece, I spoke to the HR manager about this and said that I really didn't like singing for my supper. And he looked me in the eye very straight and he said, "Michael, you're not doing that." He said, "What you're doing is giving people an opportunity to invest in what God is doing through MAF. In your case, in Papua New Guinea, it just happens to involve you." And that was a wake-up call to me, because it means that what I'm doing is looking to see what God is doing and then saying, "Dad, please may I join in?"
And what have been the challenges?
Leaving a well-paying job to a big uncertainty is obviously a challenge. Like any person, or just about any person, then not having enough money in the bank at certain times to pay the bill. That was even when I was a new vet with a young family. I think one of the foundational things for me was reading a book called Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger by Ron Sider. And he looks at the way we give and compares somebody who is has a young family and a big mortgage on $20,000 a year. It's a real struggle to give 10%. For a very well-off person with $200,000 a year, he gives the other person's entire salary, and yet it's not really a sacrifice. And so challenges with money: how do we give? How do we give generously? But how do we tie that in with the reality of a mortgage to pay, kids to feed?
How would you say this might help someone who has, say, a much more normal or regular financial lifestyle?
Well, I did have a regular income, but I think that you have to choose what your priorities are. And Nikki and I have chosen to set our lifestyle, but to prioritise giving or investing in what God is doing within that. And to actually set up a direct debit and standard orders so that 10% goes out right at the beginning of your month and you work around it is difficult, but it does ensure that things happen. At the same time, it can be a real challenge when you don't feel that you've got enough to cover the bills. Nikki would always say, "God will meet our needs through this if we're faithful," and she had a lot more faith in this than I did. But it's true that we look back, the months when I tried to whittle away to keep a little bit more were the months we struggled, but yet somehow when we did give, the bills matched up and were paid. That is, I don't know how it worked, but that's what happened.
And how has this helped your relationship with God?
It's deepened our faith in him, but we've also found it very liberating, because to give money away, to invest in what God is doing, is actually countercultural. And to be able to say that I'm prepared to not have stuff in order to be able to give frees you in a way that is deeper than you actually realise at the time that you do it. And just learning to be content and to set a lifestyle that might not be what all your friends are necessarily going afterwards. It's not a case of earning spiritual brownie points by giving, but actually just learning that giving actually builds God's generous character in you. And our experience, as I've already said, is that God is faithful. He honours us. You have to be honest. You have to give what you are able, whether that's 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever. But God will honour your honesty and your willingness to be generous in the way that He is. And He's faithful.